Okay, I welcome you to another episode of Learning Stories. This is an audio and video show where I interview a diverse set of learners from the 21st century. On today's episode, I get a chance to speak to an author whose book I'm currently reading on my Kindle. So this is really, really fun. And this is one of the joys of doing this podcast. So Sukriti is an author, screenwriter, and webcomic producer based in Mumbai. Her indie production company is called Unibrow Stories. Sukriti's three novels include The Gold Digger, an action-adventure set in Bihar, Beta Builder, a sci-fi novella set in Mumbai, and The Lehenga Games, a treasure hunt through India's fashion history. Her webcomic, Love on a Visa, a campus rom-com between an Indian girl and a Korean boy, is ongoing on Webtoon and Tapas, earning 20,000 views. You can find her on Instagram at Suki_Unibrow. So I will be linking all of Sukriti's work in the show notes, links to purchase links for her book, her wonderful website where her team and her are doing a great job putting out all these wonderful stories, and also her social media handles. She's also got a wonderful newsletter about the spice trades, which she will tell us about more, which will also be in the show notes. So Sukriti, thank you so much for doing this today. And the first question we normally start our podcast off with is, tell us a little bit about your childhood. Where did you grow up? What were you like as a little child looking out into the world with your dreams, hopes, and ambitions?
Hey, Abhishek, that's such a good question to start with. So Freudian. Um, I grew up in Mumbai, near SNDT College on Juhu Tara Road, and I went to school initially at Manikji Cooper. And I grew up in a family full of teachers, so quite an academic upbringing, but maybe not in the way you'd expect. I think a lot of my friends kind of suspected that I was just getting free tuition help at home all the time from my family. But actually, it was just more a childhood where a lot of people read books at home, and yeah, enjoyed kind of swapping, even think comic books and things like that. You mentioned that I'm a web comic producer, and a lot of that dates back to the fact that my mom and my masi, my nani, all the women in my family, they really loved comic books and would bring them home from Rajesh circulating library, and all of us would swap comic books over the summer and read those. So yeah, a very matriarchal background, because I grew up with a lot of women in my family, and slightly prudish academic, but also a lot of fun, filled with a lot of really fun books and films and things like that.
Yeah, and off the top of your head, do you remember the first books that you really enjoyed reading? Were they comics? Was there a particular author that really brought you into that world?
Ooh. I think it was similar to probably all the girls growing up in the 90s, where we started with Enid Blyton, Famous Five, Secret Seven, Five Find Outers, that kind of thing. And then progressed towards Mallory Towers and some of her other works. And then American books kind of come in at a certain age, where you have Babysitter's Club and Sweet Valley High, and you read your first, kissing scene, and it's so scandalous. It's so much fun. And alongside that was this huge collection of comic books that my family had. So we had Phantom, Dennis the Menace, Dot, Little Lola, some really good vintage comics. Um, and then, of course, when I was about 12 or 13, I think Harry Potter mania took over. And it was very interesting for those of us. I don't know how old you are. We can discuss that later. But it was very interesting for those of us who were growing up in the 90s, because we were sort of growing up alongside Harry Potter. I remember I was about 11 years old when he was 11. So that was obviously a big one. And then my nani who also stayed at home with us, was a Hindi teacher, Marathi teacher. So she would reference a lot of Premchand and Sharad Babu. And it's one of the assignments of my adult life to read more in regional languages, or at least to read more translated works in regional languages. So those books were always around. I don't think I read those as much, but it's what I'm hoping to do going ahead.
And Did Mumbai play a role in that expanded imagination? You grew up in like the city of stories and films. Growing up, were films sort of a conversation around your house? So, in that sense, or was it primarily books at that point?
No, very much films. I we we were, a complete bad habit TV family where dinner was eaten in front of the TV, and from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., whatever was prime time on Star Plus or Comedy Central or whichever new movie was playing, we were watching all of it. So it was a big conversation. I think also for all of us, it was just um, really nice to see India represented on screen in a way that felt quite authentic to us at that time. Whatever new Govinda movie and song had come out, or whatever Ravina Tandon song had come out, it felt like the same songs were playing at our birthday parties and the same songs were kind of playing around me. So that part of it was really exciting because the books I was reading, yeah, were set in Britain and the US and things like that. But film was always where you kind of found your Indianness.
Yeah, like I really relate to that, and that's something I was trying to grapple with growing up as well because I primarily read in English too, and I often thought about considering reading in other languages. And I think that's one of the benefits of growing up in a country like India, where most people speak two or three languages in addition to their mother tongue, or it could be their mother tongue, the national language, and English. So that gives you such a wide scope in terms of possibilities with languages. Because you're a writer today, Sukriti, and you have your own publishing company. But as my background's in education, and one of the things I'm always curious about is, where did the seeds for someone's career actually set in? So when you were a student at school, did you enjoy all the subjects? Were you academically, gifted in that sense, or did you have an inclination to particular subjects more than others?
I enjoyed all the subjects I studied a lot, um, which was, in hindsight, a bit of a problem because when you're, jack of all trades kind of thing. So I tried a bit of this, I tried a bit of that. At um, at school in IB, I was studying science, and then after that, as an undergraduate, I was trying to figure out my way through an economics degree, and then finally found my way to writing. But I don't think there were any early seeds of that as such. It was uh, definitely I had a family culture of books and films and creativity and all of these things, but um, none of us, nobody was telling me to become a writer. I don't think I necessarily wanted to become a writer until I tried out the other fields and saw how wrong they felt to me. Um, I think, I'm sure this is a relatable feeling where when you think about a career as a doctor or you think about a career in finance, there's a certain image you have of it. And then when you actually get into the day to day of it, it's so boring and the people around you don't feel like you. It doesn't feel like your tribe. So I think those early experiments in other subjects were what propelled me so firmly away from all of that. And for a long time, I was just very lost and trying to find what I wanted to do. Um, and writing, honestly, it's so funny. It's like I just stumbled into writing somehow, and now it's pretty much my whole life. It's like very accidentally meeting the love of your life in a meet cute in a cafe.
Yeah, because I wonder if that's something you can consciously plan for, especially growing up in the culture that we grow up in, where at least in the 90s, if you came from a certain background, there was sort of an expectation to move towards certain professions. And I think it changed over generations too, where, maybe the generation prior to us was a lot more focused on a secure job. And then I think in the 90s, it was all about those particular professions like engineering, law, accountancy. And I think with the emergence of the internet, you sort of saw people maybe opening up to other possibilities and other sort of career paths. And yeah, and I think some of us are still sort of figuring those pieces out. I'll put myself in that bracket for sure. But in terms of writing, Sukriti, do you remember the first thing that you wrote as a high school student that you were particularly proud of, like an assignment or an essay that
Do
you'd like to
you
talk about?
did you grow up in Mumbai as well?
Partly, I grew up in the Middle East, but I'd say I
Yes, I
spent my
remember.
university years. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I don't know if you would know this, you might, but initially when I was at Manikji, we were studying the ICSE curriculum, and there was always, Abhishek, these really characteristic writing prompts like autobiography of a coin, autobiography of an umbrella, autobiography of I don't know, like a park bench. Um, and they sound so dry. They sound like such horrible topics, but actually they were a lot of fun to write. And I think my earliest memories are those essays. And then obviously, when you're a little child and your essay comes back with A plus or a B or whatever on it, and you're very happy. And then everyone in your family, your nani and your dadi and all your parents are like, padho beta, read it aloud for all the guests who come. So you get the bug early on. But it was probably those ones.
And like I know you studied the IB curriculum, Sukriti. Was that something that you look back on as an important sort of defining experience, at least to shape you in terms of your hopes and dreams, but also your intellectual sort of curiosities at that point in your life?
Yeah, I think so. So in eighth grade, I moved to Dhirubhai Ambani, which had just opened up at that time. And it was in sort of barren BKC, with tumbleweeds blowing past. It was so empty. And I was one of the first few batches who were doing IB at that school. Later on, once I got into 11th grade and IB. And I think the best part about studying literature in the IB was um, that it allowed me to speak with a lot more authority on literature after those 2 years because it tackled so many different genres. It brought in authors from so many different places. We studied British poets and African short story writers and Brazilian novelists. So it was really great because when I look back at my time being a student, I'm so amazed at how much free time there is to just sit and study something in depth. You don't really get to do that as much as an adult. You don't get just these like huge chunks of time to dive into something. So I'm so happy that when I had that time, I, because of the IB, I studied all the classics, all the greats. And there are still obviously huge gaps that I have in my reading. Um, but a lot of those were already, a lot of those were filled up by stuff that I had read in the IB, and a lot of the books I still refer to, whether it's Waiting for Godot or Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. A lot of Shakespeare was stuff I had studied at that time as a student. So yeah, I'm very grateful for how rigorous that curriculum was for literature. I think maybe not so much for maths and science, by the way. I feel like CBSE kids really laugh at IB standards of maths and science, but it was really good for literature.
Do you feel like it was the curriculum, Sukriti, or do you think it was a particular teacher that shaped that thinking?
Yeah, if you're giving me a platform to call out to my teachers, I would love to do that. We had fantastic teachers at school. We had Mr. Mark Einton, who was my teacher through the IB, and one of the things I loved about him, once I got 29 on 30 in a class assignment, and I was one of those little shits who went to his office hour after that and tried to ask him how I can get 30 on 30 in the next assignment, and he just completely shot me down. He was so uninterested in that question. And I really like that. I really like that he, like, it wasn't that thing of like 99% to 100%. It was just like, enjoy the poem, man, enjoy the story, see how you feel about these essays that you're analyzing, about all the stuff that you're doing. Um, and then we had one of my big mentors for writing was a professor called Mr. Hugh Pullen. Again, a very similar story where I once submitted this essay to him, which was very flowery. And, I had packed all the best vocabulary I knew into it. It was like a Christmas cake, packed packed with raisins and dry fruit and overwhelmingly cloying and sick. And he sent me an essay called George Orwell's Politics in the English Language, which now, a lot of us obviously know and refer to. And there's this list of 6 or 7 rules in that essay, all of which are about just writing as simply and as clearly as you can. Um, and that was really, really transformative for me. My writing is almost, it's almost, I feel like I've gone too far in that direction now, where I've really, really stripped it down, and I'm slowly, slowly kind of trying to build back up to having some level of putting some meat back on the bones. But I'm really glad that when I was 17 and 18, that was the strictness of the grammar education that we had, because it is very cringy when people just are throwing vocab and adjectives at you. It's not a fun read. So I'm glad I was stopped from doing that.
Yeah, and I feel like that's such a strong foundation for someone at that point of time, because I studied literature in university, and I feel like some of the books that you mentioned and some of the processes were things we did somewhere in the middle of our degree. And I think language in any way is something that we have to use on a day-to-day basis, no matter what field we jump into. And I think being a big reader, can help you in so many ways, and no matter what profession you are in. You don't have to read literature because you want to write literature. I think literature can benefit us in so many different ways, even if we don't particularly write it in any way. And I think I can say the same for stories or any form of storytelling for that matter. um, Now I'm
Yeah,
curious
yeah.
about your time. Sorry, go ahead.
I just really love what you said about that. It's absolutely true. Like I think that's kind of what my professors were getting at as well, that if you write clearly, you can think clearly first. You can convey an effective message clearly. And who doesn't need that? That's pretty much a universal demand on us when we communicate as two people. um so yeah, I fully agree with what you said. Not, it's not just good writing for writers, but hopefully good writing for everyone.
Yeah, and like once you were done with your IB program, Sukriti, you decided to pursue a degree in economics, and you moved to the UK at that point of time. And I know studying the subject is one thing, but I think being studying abroad in another country right after high school can be an experience in uh, can be a good, bad, eye-opening experience in so many different ways. For someone that is maybe going to pursue the same path, if you could share some things that you learned about yourself,
Hmm.
um, things that you can talk about, and things that funny stories for that matter, because I feel like that university experience is not really only about the subject that you study. I think it's so much more than that. And I just wanted to know what your memories of it are right now.
I'm so glad you've asked me to answer this from a humorous standpoint, because yeah, I don't have any good advice on this. I was trying to study economics very misguidedly and dropped it after 3 years, but I do have a lot of funny stuff about those years. I think the biggest takeaway from those years is learning how to live poor, like learning, I mean, poor, I say. I was in London, studying, but on a very tight budget. For me, at least, it was a very tight budget. I feel like all of this is very relative. But I had always lived at home with my family. And when you live at home with your family, the food is just coming somehow. You don't know what the price of onions is. If there's, you can be quite spoiled. You don't really, even if your family tries very hard to ground you, you're not the one paying for stuff, so you just don't know how all of this operates. And I remember when I went to London, I was just so aghast at how expensive everything was. A tap on the tube, on the London tube, was like £2 75, which I thought was daylight robbery. And so I would walk around everywhere. And I got really good at like identifying grocery stores that had meal deals going on, and a sandwich and a chips and a drink combo. And you also learn how to navigate so many relationships smartly, again, from a financial viewpoint. Like, for example, you might be friends with people who are going to an expensive nightclub and drinking and all of that, and you can't afford it, but you still maybe want to be friends. So how do you navigate that? How do you stay with a best friend who wants to be your roommate, but the rent is way above what you can afford? So I just think it got me very comfortable with being cheap, and kind of being okay, truly okay with what I have. And I honestly don't think I could have been in the creative field for as long as I have if I wasn't truly okay with that. I'm okay not being the richest person in a group. I'm okay in sitting out events that I cannot afford. I'm truly okay doing, a lot of those things. Um, and that was a really, really huge learning. So to anyone who's going abroad, and maybe feeling like shame about how little pocket money you have, or maybe feeling the guilt of how much money your parents are paying to send you to these places, um, I just feel all of that is super instructive. Go deeper into it, feel all those emotions. um, and then the other thing that was great is obviously like making friends internationally, because again, it's very confidence boosting. I don't feel today that if I'm on Instagram or something, I can only talk to a Mumbai audience, or whatever that is. I do feel like I can potentially talk to, a wider audience. And I do have a sense of how they might respond to me, because for so many years I've known how my friends abroad respond to me when I'm saying things. So that was a really good confidence boost. But the money is my favorite part of that whole experience.
Yeah, and I think that can be something that like most international students may not have a lot of background knowledge in, except for all that parental prodding about be careful with everything you do, don't go anywhere, stay in your room, or whatever. But I feel like, we always speak about the good parts about being an international student, right? But there are lots of other challenges, as you mentioned, like the cultural challenges, the weather challenges, finances, because you are studying, and in addition to the university fees, there are lots of other costs like living costs, food costs, and these have to be factored in, and it does add up, even if you have budgeted it of over the long term, right? And you know I think it's a one thing I really admired about studying in the West. I went to university in Canada. I think it was really admirable how young people were when they started taking up part-time jobs, and how that financial sort of independence shaped their thinking, which I thought was interesting. And I didn't see as much of that in uh, in the context that I grew up in sort of a South Asian sort of context. Did you have a similar experience or observation, Sukriti?
Yeah, similar for sure. I don't think I was ever really like held accountable for my finances. And it's not like I just had no leash. I was just given a certain amount of pocket money, and it was kind of like, okay, I'll operate within that. But yeah, when I went abroad, that was definitely the first time I saw people take real initiative for their own finances, take that into their hands, work for it, apply for part-time jobs, apply for campus jobs. um, that was really great. I do feel perhaps that, I mean, not I feel I know friends who stayed back in Mumbai and started the hustle much earlier than I did, because I was kind of still floating around abroad, being an international student for a long time. But I had friends who, straight out of 10th grade or 12th grade, when they began college, they also began a side hustle to make some kind of money. And actually, those were some of the earliest successes that my alumni group had. It's the people who started that out so early here in Mumbai. The rest of us really took quite some time to find our way through life, both abroad and then coming back and kind of trying to find your network here. So yeah, I think it is really, I mean, whether it's in the US or whether it's here in India, I'm very I'm very proud and amazed by people who start the hustle that early.
And yeah, and I think it's natural for us to think about what other people are doing at a particular point in our lives, especially when we're in that undergraduate phase, where we are figuring out, what particular profession we're going to commit the rest of our lives to. When you were in a city like London, Sukriti, was that something um, you explored in terms of just the history and literature around that city? Like one thing I remember really, you know, enjoying was just going to lectures in other departments at the university I was studying at, because I thought this is fun, it's free, and I'm a student here. Why not do this? And also the libraries. I was amazed that these universities had libraries bigger than anything I had seen growing up. So, apart from economics, were there like other subjects or museum visits or other things you like doing academically at that point of time?
Yeah, absolutely. We for for anyone who's listening, they may know that you're one of the Mumbai Literary Club book club participants, and so am I. And our last book was The Education of Yuri by Jerry Pinto, and it felt so similar to my LSE days because most of the story was actually about his co-curriculars and the classes, the education outside of class. Um, and that's certainly how I felt as well because my classes were accounts and statistics and something called econometrics, which I can't even remember what that was. Um, some maths and stuff, but I got to take a few electives in Russian economic history and Japanese economic history. And then actually in my last year, I just went completely renegade and took a bunch of literature courses, which I should have put that together earlier. That okay, there was the obvious sign that when I could choose what I wanted, I chose literature. And then I also just had a lot of fun doing like theater club and India Society, of course. Um, yeah, there was like a literary society there as well. All the art stuff. I mean, even the daft stuff you do as a college student, belly dancing and I don't know, some kind of bakery thing I was trying to do at some point. All of it. It was a very full experience.
Oh, fun. And like you decided to make the jump into the creative arts by pursuing a master's in an MFA in creative nonfiction, to be particular. I'm just thinking about that decision. That's such an interesting course, first of all. Like as soon as I heard that, I was like, wow, this is something I would have loved to study. But what was that experience like, moving to another sort of continent and getting this course started for you?
That was the doing the creative writing course at Columbia was the first time in my life I truly felt like I was in the right place and surrounded by the right people. Um, and there's many people who haven't yet perhaps found what they love and things like that, and they're not sure what that feels like. And I'd just say that you'll know it when you find it. It just feels
Mm.
so right. So after kind of being, not really enjoying myself so much studying economics at LSE, I took a year off and went to New York on a scholarship, thankfully, this time for my family finances, on a scholarship. And I had this 2-year program in Columbia. And it was creative nonfiction, which means you take real life stories, but then you present them in a really entertaining, engaging kind of way. I think anyone who's seen a really good documentary knows exactly what creative nonfiction is. Especially these really fascinating documentaries like Chernobyl and things like that, where the whole thing feels like fiction. It's got such amazing suspense and pacing, such strong characters, but it happened. It's based on something very real. So that was what we were studying, and it suited me really well because I do struggle a little bit with all out fiction. I do sometimes feel like it needs to teach me something, or there needs to be something more to it than just swimming in feelings all the time. And I'm sorry, for offending any fiction folk with that horrible definition of fiction. Um, but that really appealed to me because I was like, oh, okay, I can write, I can take existing research and stories from India, and then I can present them in a really fun fiction way. Um, Also, my favorite books were things like the Da Vinci Code. Where I know the Da Vinci Code is fiction. It's really, it's all just a lot of conspiracy bullshit. But you get that feeling, that you're learning a little bit about art history. You're learning about these cathedrals and the Illuminati and all these secret societies. So I love that space. So not only was I studying something I really enjoyed, but the people who were around me, Abhishek, was so my people. These were people who were also very cheap, who did not mind drinking a lot of cheap beer and like walking all over the city instead of taking taxis. None of us, I think, had any ambitions to make money, which is crazy. And it's not because all of us came from super privileged backgrounds. There were a lot of people from super privileged backgrounds because it's an art school, of course. Who the hell else can afford to go and study art for 2 years? But even the people who are from working class backgrounds, it just wasn't such a big burning desire for them to make money. Whereas my friends at LSE, there was this like ladder in front of them of doing the spring internship at a bank and a summer internship and then getting the job and then progressing up the career ladder. I, we can talk about that later on at length, but that was just not something that felt like how I felt within me. Um, but this writing group felt a lot more, it felt like we were on the same, we were sharing the same wavelength. And then lastly, I just really liked New York. When I was, a large part of that is to do with the fact that my boyfriend from high school was also studying nearby at the time. So it just I felt a lot more settled there, much faster. And when I was in London, I was not only doing long distance with my boyfriend, but my parents were far away from me, and things like that. So I think it just felt like there was a bit, it took some time to thaw and for London to kind of melt its way into my heart. But New York, very quickly, I loved it.
How nice. And I really enjoyed reading your piece on walks. This was quite some time ago in 2016 or so, where you spoke about navigating that time with your partner and now your husband, which I think was just so, because I understand there's this sentiment that you sort of, expressed in that piece that is so hard to understand. The opportunity and the privilege to study abroad, but then the challenges of studying a subject that is not in the STEM disciplines or the finance professions and immigration law. There are so many of these complex layers around this immigration decision, especially for people that opt to move to maybe the US or a particular country, and I think you captured that so beautifully in that piece, and it was so well written. And another thing I read that you wrote was on your wonderful newsletter about the spice trades, where you spoke about the different kinds of experiences that you were part of in this MFA course. There were lectures, and there were two other things you mentioned. So if you could, briefly touch upon, maybe some of the writing assignments that you worked on during this program, because I'm sure they were very different from the essays you wrote as a high school student in the IB program. And how did this shape you as a writer in terms of those writing projects at that time?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. And I think this is something, it's a topic really worth discussing because if we ask ourselves, how can we teach more creatively in India? How can we nurture young creative minds well? I think the MFA programs of the US provide a really good blueprint for that. So you start this 2 year program and you have three different kinds of three different elements of the course. So there's lectures where you just read a lot of books, and then every week, this professor will deliver just a virtuoso lecture on these bunch of books. Then there's seminars, which are smaller groups of people. So if lectures, I mean, lectures can be 50 or 100 people, but seminars are more like 20 people, and they're usually by a very renowned author or journalist or whatever again, and they are more focused on teaching you a particular genre of writing. So, for example, we had seminars about food writing, comedy writing, writing about sex, which I actually studied and which was really very interesting. Just how can we get away from writing about sex in almost like a pornographic way and write about it more authentically and beautifully? There was a reading we were assigned in that seminar, which was a reading where the journalist had gone to an old age home and actually asked the seniors there if they still have sex and how they do it. And it was not only really funny but very eye opening and just so nice to talk about this universal human experience in a different way, not just straight up 50 shades of gray porn. Then there was a course on war writing, reporting from a war front, because that was something people were doing. um, there were courses on art critique, everything from critiquing theater to dance to music, um, visual art critiques. There was a lot of stuff. So those were fascinating. You had to do a certain number of credits of those every semester, and you didn't really write so much in a seminar, and you didn't really write at all for your lectures. You only had one end of term assignment. But the thing where you were writing constantly was called the workshop. The workshop happened every week. It was a very small group of students, maybe 10 students, led by one workshop professor. And each workshop was 3 to 4 hours long. And in each workshop, 2 to 3 students would have previously submitted their writing, and everyone had read it, and everyone would critique that piece together in class. That workshop, Abhishek, remains till today one of the most instructive things I have ever done for myself as a writer. Because where else are you going to get, 9 other people, budding writers, and one very established writer critiquing you again and again and again, also following your progress over 2 years, which is so crucial, really, because most of the time people are going to my whole body of work, people are going to get one snapshot of that and they're going to judge my writing based off of that. But to have people who had followed me over the years and could tell me things like, oh, you used to be more scared about talking about this earlier, and now 2 years later you approach it really much more confidently, or you used to be more honest when you were young and you're more glib and charming now, so can you get back some of that honesty? That was so important to have while trying to shape this voice. Um, it was so good to be in a space where people can tell you something really nasty about your writing. Well, not nasty, but something really heartbreaking about your writing. They can just straight up say, I did not enjoy this piece. But then after class, you're friends with them again, and you go and you have a coffee with them. This feels so small, but it is so big. It's about befriending your critics, and it's about having a human connection with people that exists beyond just what you think of each other's writing. My best friends were not the people who loved my writing the most. In fact, my best friends, I don't even think really enjoyed my writing all that much. But we were still really close friends because we liked each other as people. And then lastly, it was really, really good for me to see where I stand in this sort of small ranking of people. And it left me with the belief that you truly don't have to be the best writer to make it. You just have to know your own strengths. Um, I am very aware of my strengths and my weaknesses as a writer. I don't think I'm particularly good yet at character building, which is such a foundational thing, but I really want to get better at that. I don't think I'm particularly, good yet at varying sentence structure and things like that. But I'm a very fast writer. I can be funny, and my world building is quite good. So just to have this self awareness and to be able to talk about your strengths without being arrogant and your weaknesses without falling to tears uh, was really good for me. And I think we do this in all other professions. Like if you ask someone in finance what their strengths and weaknesses are, it's a pretty straightforward answer. But I feel as creatives, we're so defensive and guarded, and also the world kind of makes you that way because it doesn't allow you to be anything less than like a brilliant genius. But that wasn't true at all. We had all kinds of writers in the program, and all of them found their niche. All of them are still, trying to find their space in the world. All of them are still enjoying what they do. So I loved it. I don't know if I've prattled on too much, but this was honestly, it was one of the best 2 years of my life.
No, and I think that's such a nice thing to hear for anyone that's an aspiring writer as well. The fact that at one point of time, you know, you were also struggling. It's easy to see, you write these wonderful books that you write today, but it's come through years and years of effort. And I was reading somewhere where it took you about 7 years to actually bring Lehenga Games to life. Would that be accurate, Sukriti? Which
Yeah,
I think
because I
is.
was
Sorry, go ahead.
sorry.
No, I wasn't saying anything. Go ahead.
Yeah, it took 7 years. I was saying because I was so ashamed of it in the beginning. It was my first novel, and it was really, it is really something to see your own product finally out there on the page. And it's very nerve wracking because you're trying so hard to make it the best possible version of itself, and to show the most of your intelligence and your empathy and your skill. Um, and so I just was so afraid of it, Abhishek, for so long. So I started working on it, and then at multiple points I would leave it and I would go work on other projects. But every year for 7 years, I have done one draft of the Lehenga Games, and sometimes multiple drafts. And the problem was that as I was growing as a writer, I really wanted this book to grow alongside and to showcase, at that point, what I thought was the best version of myself. And you can't do that. Like, you are a human being, and that book is a book. It's a non-living thing. At some point, you're going to have to cut it off and let it go out there. So that book took me really long, but after that, I've become much less precious about putting books out there, much faster about letting them go out into the world now. And I think what was really nice for me to see is that, um, Gold Digger, which was the first book I officially released, which took me maybe a total of 3 months to write, received, yeah, the same kind of love, and the same kind of connection that readers felt with the Lehenga Games. So I don't have, I'm not advising anyone to be very fast or to be very slow or anything, but in my case, it turned out that both books actually found their place in people's hearts.
Yeah, and I particularly enjoyed this because as someone that lives in a urban metro in India today in 2025, it's got this narrative tone that is fun, lighthearted, ambitious, but not in a. I don't know how to articulate it, but Mihika, the main character, she's ambitious in a kind way. I don't know how to say it any better.
Nice.
She genuinely um, loves what she's doing, but she's also open to other possibilities, and I thought that was different for a character that was figuring things out. And I feel like there's also something about the rawness about her worldview that I think is important to capture at that particular age. I feel like writing
Mm.
Mihika with a more evolved sort of life perspective would would give her a polish that maybe would let her lose a little bit of that charm. Some of that naivety that I saw in how she was navigating relationships actually made her so much more endearing, and less judgmental. And uh, yeah, I'm halfway through the book now, so I'm not gonna say too much, and I will be linking it in the show notes. So I highly recommend you pick it up, and it's available on Kindle now. And Sukriti did say that there will be a physical copy,
Yep.
available soon. But the Kindle copy is amazing, and you can read it on your phone or your Kindle, and it's also available on Wattpad for people that
Yep.
would like to read it at a lower cost or at a no cost. But
Free.
more on
Yeah.
that. Free, correct. So,
Yeah.
Sukriti, the spice trades, like you're done with college, okay, university is behind you, and now I know, everyone has so many things happening in their lives. We choose different cities, we have relationships, and there are so many other things happening in our lives. But for you, in terms of your professional landscape, right? What was happening in your mind at that point of time? Like moving back, staying abroad, working in a particular profession. Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do? What were some things you you dipped your toes in? And what did you realize about yourself in those early working years, getting out into the world after that world of university?
That's a really good question. Um, the very very long term dream was always huge fame and popularity as a writer. Long term, it's like going to the casino and you're like, okay, if I stay here for 50 years, I might hit a lottery. That's the long term dream. But the short term plans, a lot of them just revolved around practicalities of life. So when I finished at Columbia, I had to pay rent because I wanted to stay on for a few more years. So I took up a ghostwriting job, which till today remains one of the best paid jobs that I had done, because it was between 25 to 50 US dollars an hour, which felt amazing. And I could very easily live my life on that. So it was me working with this business lady who wanted to put out a book. Great gig, really, really interesting. I mean, not so emotionally fulfilling, obviously, as doing my own writing, but definitely paid all the bills. And then after that, when I was about 27, I got married to said boyfriend from a few minutes earlier. And he was also, I mean, he's my high school friend. So we were both from Mumbai, but we were both in the US at that time. And he had a job that was beginning in Denver, Colorado. So when I was out in Colorado, we knew we were going to be there for 2 years, and I knew I had this empty chunk of time again. So that's when I thought, okay, this is a good time to work on a novel, because it's unlikely I'm going to get, an arts job or a ghostwriting gig here in Colorado as easily as I did in Manhattan. So this is a good time for me to work on something of my own. And after I had gotten married, I had learned so much about Indian fabrics and traveled, to so many cities, Jaipur, Lucknow, Hyderabad, Varanasi, to look at these weavers and their fabrics and things like that. So I was just obsessed. I had fallen deep, deep, deep down the rabbit hole and really wanted to write something about that. Um, and then we were doing that for a little while. And then again, his company kind of moved him closer to Asia, to Singapore and Mumbai, um, which was something both of us really wanted as well. We were really hoping for something like that. And then as soon as that happened, it really allowed me to travel a lot more back home, come back to India a lot more, and find more stories here to write about. It also allowed me to move away from just novels and work on film, and screenplays, and meeting Mumbai producers and all of those things. So yeah, so as you can see, there isn't a big plan here, a big master plan. It's mostly just reacting to things that were happening around me. But yeah, I think one of the great things about a writing career is you can always find something to do. There's always some cool new project waiting around the corner.
Yeah, and like in terms of the piece you wrote about the spice trades, Sukriti, and that's something when I was reading your piece, I feel like I got the language to talk about some of my own experiences in this space. Especially
Yes.
because there's no like set template for what that career timeline can look like. It becomes very challenging for you to communicate what you are doing to your loved ones. And I know you've thought about this and written about this considerably. Like, what has worked for you in terms of talking about what you are doing and helping at least the people that are closest to you understand how this makes sense in the long term? And what would you recommend for someone that is in one of these spice trades? And also tell us what is the spice trades. I'm sure it's not those masalas that we're normally used to. I'm sure there's more to it than that. Yeah.
Yes, great, great series of questions. One of my favorite things to think about. All right, well, the Spice Trades is a Substack newsletter for anyone in a non corporate, non linear career. So, SPICE stands for sports people, performers, innovators, creatives, and entrepreneurs. I thought this was the coolest acronym when I came up with this earlier this year, and now I have sort of like lost track of what it means. But I think there's basically, when I look at my husband's work, and when I look at my other friends who are working in finance, including all LSE friends, um, you understand why they use this metaphor of the career ladder. Because these guys, as long as they keep showing up and they keep, working competently, there is this straight upward graph. They will get the promotions, they will get the bonuses, they will get the up. In practically every other field of life, that doesn't happen. It's not a ladder, it's a jungle gym. You go up and down and all around, and you drop to the floor and you have to climb back up again. So I really just wanted to write something for other young people in India like me who are in one of these non-corporate, non-linear careers. And one of the posts that I had written to your question was about how to introduce ourselves. Because, if, for example, you are vice president of energy investments at Goldman Sachs, there you go, you're done. People might not even really understand what you do on a daily basis, but there are these lovely, lovely full words in there, names in there that you can lean upon. Whereas if, like me, for a couple of years, yes, I was a writer, but I didn't have any books out. And yes, I was a screenwriter, but none of my films and movies had been made yet. And, what the hell am I doing? Like, how do I introduce myself? Um, and when I was speaking about my work, to friends and family and things like that, I just found it really instructive to say, hi, I'm Sukriti, to own that, even if there wasn't any external to say, hi, I'm Sukriti, I'm a writer, to own that, even if there wasn't any external like evidence of it yet. But I was writing every day, so I am a writer. And then to say, I am working on this story, which is like Lara Croft set in Bihar. So to lean on uh, examples that they might know already, to make my kind of esoteric and strange work more accessible to them and more easily understandable to them. And then lastly, to hint in some way at how I was managing finances. So I would always say something like, oh, but I'm a freelance screenwriter on the side, and I write screenplays for producers. Or I would say, oh, I'm a ghostwriter on the side, and I write these things. Because I think people just, if you tell them you're a musician, or if you tell someone you're a sculptor, or you're a cricketer, 9 out of 10 people, I think, are thinking, okay, how does this person make money, and how do they, like, what does that part of their life look like? How are they dealing with money and finances? So to kind of hint at that, allow them into your world a little bit, and then also just own your identity, I think is really good for introducing yourself. And you said also, how do I talk about this with my family? My family has been very good and open about letting me be in this experimental state for really long. But I think the analogy that has worked best, again, a financial analogy, is to say that, hey guys, look, I'm not in this career thinking that, oh, like after these many years I'm going to earn these many lakhs, and after these many years I'm going to have a car, and after these many years I'm going to buy a house. I am in this career like someone entering a casino, and all I can tell you is how long I am willing to play for. And I would ideally like to play for as long as I can. So right now, with the limited resources that I have, I'm playing the slot machines, and I'm hoping for a lottery. If I get a little more money, I will move to roulette and blackjack, and I will aim for a lottery. And if I have like a shit ton of money through this somehow, I will go for the big poker tables, and I will again try to hit a lottery. That is this career, and there is obviously no guarantee of any of this. All you can do is trust that I'm a good player, and trust that I'm committed to this process. That is pretty much it. And to my family's credit, and also I don't really know why, but to their credit, they do seem to trust me in letting this carry on a little while longer. So yeah.
Yeah, you did a great job articulating a way to communicate things, because there is the need to explain yourself to that detail is much less in professions that people have standard models for, like when someone says they are a scientist or an engineer, you often make assumptions about what they will do without having to ask them this. But you know, when you are in a profession that there's this preconceived notion of what a musician is or what a writer is, and I feel like you were able to maybe allow the person to get through a small talk conversation without it being awkward for both parties, because I don't think you necessarily want to disclose your entire life to someone you just meet at a party, right? But
Yep.
yeah, I think that's super helpful. And yes, I will be linking Sukriti's newsletter. She's done a great job talking about some of these things over there. But about your entrepreneurial journey, Sukriti, Unibrow Stories, tell me a little bit about where did that idea come from? Because you're not just a writer that writes novels. You've written webcomics. I know you've actively pitched screenplays, and you're also like a screenwriter. So how did all of this come together to create this idea called Unibrow Stories?
Big question, but I'll try to answer this in the simplest way that I can. Early on in my career, I had a lot of opportunities opened up to me by the big gatekeepers. So I was at one point talking very seriously to a commissioning editor at Penguin India to publish the Lehenga Games. There was a talk with one of the agents at Red Ink in Delhi. Writers will know this is like a big literary agency, and there was a conversation about me being signed on with them. In film, I have been fortunate to have producers interested in the stories I wanted to say, and offer to work with me. And in each of these three cases, publishers, agents, producers, I have received a contract. And then when I got into the breakdown of that contract, I realized how much those contracts are stacked against the young creative, because you might get this upfront fee for your service as a writer, but all of the IP, all of the future rights to this piece of work are essentially then belong to that person. Um, which it can be fair or not fair depending on how you think about it. If you feel you can do a better job of taking your product to market and marketing it, then it feels unfair to you, because then what is that other person providing? Um, I basically had a lot of these conversations, these legal conversations, and conversations about what I can do versus what the gatekeepers can do, conversations about how so many creators these days are just independently taking to platforms like Instagram and YouTube to put out their art instead of going through these big gatekeepers. And all of this basically came down to the thinking that I could create a creative team of my own that worked on books and films and webcomics, and we owned the rights and we distributed them and we marketed them. It was easier said than done. It is an absolute pain in the ass to market these products. Um, there are times when I definitely wish that I had just signed one of those stupid contracts and been done with it already. But that is how Unibrow Stories came about. So the goal was that we all of our stories across genres would not be so highbrow that they're alienating. So it wouldn't be like very highbrow literary fiction or something like that. It wouldn't be a very artsy, independent cinema kind of product. But it wouldn't be completely lowbrow. It wouldn't be, just popcorn entertainment or just like a poorly written book with bad grammar. It would be unibrow, which is in between. And we would make products across all types of platforms and genres in this space. Fun Indian stories that are not very highbrow, not very lowbrow. They're clever, they feel good. This was the vision. And since then, I have written three novels, which Unibrow Stories has published and is marketing and is distributing. I work now with many illustrators to put out web comics. We have a beautiful campus rom-com between an Indian girl and a Korean guy out in a university in the US. It's a really cute story. It's called Love on a Visa, and it's out on Webtoon and Tapas, which are webcomic mobile platforms. And we have a new comic coming up for Instagram called The Nink, which is no income, no kids, only vibes. And it's about this young guy who's an artist academic, and he's living with his parents even though he's in his late 20s. And he's just kind of trying to get through this life, get just survive life a little bit. Um, so that's been really fun. And then all of these products, whether it's Love on a Visa, or whether it's the three books that I've written, all of them have screenplay adaptations which are being pitched to various producers in Mumbai. That is kind of the goal, hopefully, to monetize one of these things, when it can maybe become a movie or something like that. Or, if I have a little more money to play at the casino, I would love to produce some of these for YouTube or Instagram on my own, since I do own the rights to do so. Um, it has been This whole entrepreneurial journey has been way more work than I expected. But sometimes, Abhishek, when I compare it to a friend who's published with one of the big publishers, sometimes they've had a really good experience and sometimes it's been so shit, like they cannot choose their book cover sometimes. Or let's say if their book didn't sell as well as expected, there are no further print runs, the book cannot be found anywhere else, and the writer herself cannot just put it out there online because she doesn't have the right to do so any longer. So for all intents and purposes, that story is gone, because of what the publisher believes. However hard I have to work on Unibrow Stories, however much of an uphill and lifelong battle it is, I think it's worth it because at least I continue to have the agency to do what I want to with all of these stories.
Yeah, I completely get that, because if you are working on a story for 7 years, to see it dealt with that kind of attention and care, that you know is the least expectation you have, right? And if it's only based on a commercial sort of outcome, which I think is interesting in an Indian landscape, especially if you are writing in English in India, though we have a large audience, because there are so many competing sort of spaces for our attention today, like the idea of reading, um, and that's something I wanted to ask you about, is the economics of being an author in India, because you've seen it from both sides. And I know a lot of people look at it from a very aspirational perspective. It would be really nice to have a book out there and write a story, but um, it's not as easy as and I think there's the good and the bad. But for someone that wants to write their own book right now, what are some things that you would recommend to them based on your own experience? And I know Unibrow is a you do work with authors that are interested in the same sort of um, stories that you write. So maybe just tell us some advice for new authors right now.
Um, I, my big hope of publishing these books, my only financial hope for these books is if one of them becomes a movie. There is otherwise no money to be made at this level, publishing like this. Maybe if you're Chetan Bhagat or Amish Tripathi or something, those people are making a lot of money. But even very well established literary fiction authors in India have day jobs. They're working in companies and doing other things. I have not earned back any of the money that I have made on these books. And if I kind of subtract my own the cost of paying myself from the book, then the big costs really are the book cover and some forms of reviews and distribution and things like that. You can quite easily publish a whole book and do the whole shebang for 50,000 rupees, let's say. But it is still unlikely that anyone will make back that 50K, and certainly not enough to live life with. So yeah, the money coming into Unibrow is still very much money from other creative gigs that I do, which is similar across other industries as well. I have friends who are film directors, but the main money that they make is through running commercials and music videos and things like that. You do the film for like your big passion project, but you don't make any money out of that. Um, and then I would also say that to anyone who's starting out writing a book, um, what was the initial, when books had just kind of come in, when the printing press was first created, they were this amazing way for us to distract ourselves and entertain ourselves. Um, and now all of us are kind of, oh, woe is me, no one is reading, no one is picking up a book any longer. But that's because they have moved on to other ways to entertain themselves and distract themselves. Scrolling is our Dickens. So, increasingly, Abhishek, the big question that I have is, why am I pushing so hard to get people to read this thing when the what I want them to read for, they are accomplishing that same thing through their phones. I want to entertain them and distract them, but they are being better entertained and distracted on their phones. So if I was, for the next set of books that I have in mind, I'm not thinking of them as books at all. I'm thinking, can I send them out as like short Substack or Medium newsletters? Can I do like Instagram micro writing? Can I write romance on Wattpad, which continues to be one of the few places where people do actively seek out prose? Um, so, I think early on I was very much of the thing of, this is what I want to say and this is the story I want to tell, and then I will connect the dots and take it to market. And it's okay if you're in that phase and you want to go through those steps. That's okay. Go through those steps. But I think there's also no shame in admitting later on that, okay, these stories are not something that everyone is clamoring to read. So how do I now see what they want, and how do I as a writer best serve that? And if that means that I have to tell a story on an Instagram reel, or if I have to write like a 60-second YouTube short narrative, then so be it. I have no I'm quite excited, honestly, by the challenge of that. Like it's just a new way to reach people. I'm very keen on doing that instead. And I will say that out of all the products that we have, um, our reels on Instagram and our webcomic, which is again on mobile only, completely outpaces any number of reads and things like that that I get on the books. So if the books are all in a range of sales of hundreds or thousands, our webcomic is at 20,000 views, and our reels that we do are at 250,000 views. So that tells me as a producer where the audience is at. And if I don't go there to that audience, then I'm stupid. Why am I trying so hard to push this other thing? Um, so it depends. I think if someone is trying to write a book today for a passion project, then they should absolutely do it. It really helps you make sense of your mind and your own feelings on so many things. But if they're thinking of doing it as a business, I think it's worth spending some time just trying to crack what the market wants and trying to figure out how best you can provide that.
Very interesting. Yeah, because those numbers that you said were quite something. Like the difference was quite stark in terms of the engagement numbers you see in like a reel and in like a published sort of book. And I think what's admirable is your ability to stay with the story and not the medium. I think storytelling is what you are really passionate about, and I feel like you are open to using all the available spaces and mediums to tell those stories. And I don't think a lot of people are as flexible or open-minded in terms of how they want to get that sort of yeah, and I wonder if it's also because of your entrepreneurial sort of approach to being a creative, where you are doing this and seeing the logistics of bringing a creative project to life, where you are also the person handling marketing and sales and distribution, where you're speaking to the customers that will buy your stories, and you realize that, okay, maybe some of them are here, maybe. And it's nice that at Unibrow you're creating products for almost the entire spectrum of users. I love what your team's doing on Instagram. I think I was just looking at Love on a Visa today morning, and I think it's so beautifully illustrated, and I see that would work so well on like an app like Instagram, or even like a website, because I feel like that's where sort of the audience is going in a lot of ways. But for the last question, Sukriti, I wanted to ask you about Lehenga Games, because I'm reading it now, and I think it's such a thoroughly enjoyable novel. And again, I don't want to reveal anything about it, but I wanted to ask you about the research process for this book, because um, there are moments in it where you hit on some pretty important themes. For instance, the conversation that the main character, who is a fashion designer, am I right in saying that, Sukriti?
Yeah, yeah,
And her conversation with um, with an embroiderer and a tailor, or a craftsperson. I mean, again, you'll have to get these terms right for me. Just how you threw light on the fact that big name designers are able to make so much money, but the people making these designs are not able to, have like a sustainable living. And I found that part of the book so interesting, and how um, the story was throwing light on that, but then also how through the narrative you were able to throw light on this rich tradition of fabrics and textiles that is sort of connected to the Indian subcontinent, going back to the independence movement. Some of the facts, like for instance, the chakra on the Indian flag, or the name India coming from indigo, or Sindh, that connection that I found. Wow, I mean, why don't I know more about this? That's probably because I am ignorant, but what did you learn about textiles and fabrics while you were researching this book? If you could tell us about
oh,
that.
my favorite question. My favorite question. I could talk about this for so long. I will not. I'll be brief, but it was when I was a bride, when I got married in 2017. I think I had a really good sense of how aesthetically I wanted to look. I want to wear these pastel colors, and I want to wear this and this, blah blah blah. When I actually went out into the markets of India and went to these craft centers like Varanasi, later on I had gone to Kanchi, where they make the famous kanji, Kanchipurams and Kanjivarams. And when you actually see what the weavers are doing, um, that is your first step as a student of Indian fabric and fashion. Anything you might feel before that, oh, this is the color I like and this is the shimmer I like. It's all sort of, to me it feels a bit like, okay, I was a child at that time. um, I went all around India to these places. I also just did a lot of armchair research for this book, reading so many interviews from fashion places like Voice of Fashion, Vestoge, Border and Fall. I read Shefali Vasudev's The Powder Room. She's the first editor of Marie Claire India, and she's written this amazing book, a kind of behind the scenes of Indian fashion. And I started learning that the fabrics that were made in India, patola, kalamkari, Kanchipuram, Kanjivaram, ajrak prints, kantha embroidery, dhakai, jamdani, these fabrics were are actually historic fabrics. They have this incredible legacy around the world. Um, to give you just one example, Gujarat has that really cool tie dye that you think of when you think of like dandiya and garba ghagras. It has that really cool tie dye that used to be exported out to the U.S. Midwest as handkerchiefs, which the cowboys would tie around their neck. And if you think of a cowboy, you can think of that rust red or indigo blue kind of handkerchief around their neck, and it's in that same tie dye pattern. And there they called it bandana, but of course, it comes from the Hindi word bandhana, to tie, tie dye. And it was such an obvious link, and yet a link that had completely eluded me. I had never made that connection. There were so many things that I learned about our fabrics and about the incredible craftsmanship and the very painstaking methods required to make fabrics like these. And it's completely changed how I dress and how I shop. I really do find it very hard to shop, especially at fast fashion places anymore, like H&M or Zara or whatever, because I feel like those guys are employing these, sweatshops full of laborers in countries that have incredible fashion histories of their own. And I would much rather spend the same amount of money, but go to out to the weavers of Maharashtra, of Bengal, of wherever our listeners are listening in from. If there are weaving clusters all around us, and you can go there, and with the same amount of money, even if it's 2,000 rupees, you can buy something that has been hand printed or hand woven or hand tie dyed. Um, and I just find that so much more interesting now. And I also find it the prettiest way to you know advocate for change. I think if I can kind of help people out or change the world by just wearing a pretty sari, that's that's exactly the kind of level of activism that I am at. So that, yeah, it helped a lot. It taught me a lot, it changed me a lot, and it became the guiding principle of that book, to pass this message on to as many other people as I could.
How wonderful. And yeah, I'm excited to finish this. And the second half is quite exciting because now they're in the middle of India trying to. I'm a little worried about what's going to happen because things are really building up. The way you've set this novel up, this 10 to 9 day window to finish this huge challenge, I'm a little nervous for Mihika and that group, but I love how positive and optimistic they are. So right now, I'm
I'm
hoping for
glad.
the best.
I'm
But
glad.
yeah, and I just wanted to ask you because you're a writer yourself, Sukriti. Do you have any recommendations of Indian authors that you've recently read and enjoyed? Just one or two, and maybe a couple of things that you thought was unique about their voice that you are learning a lot from as a writer.
But unfortunately, they're all creative nonfiction.
It's perfect. Yeah,
Not
that's good.
Okay. All right. So, one of the books I read last year that I absolutely loved was called Daughters of the Sun by Ira Mukhoti. And she's a British Indian writer, I believe. And basically, this book is a summary of all the Mughal queens. So, when we studied history, Indian history in ICSE, you kind of go through this list of Mughal kings. It's like Babur, Humayun, Akbar, Shah Jahan, sort of on and on and on. And you hear glimpses of the queens, Noor Jahan, Mumtaz Mahal, but you don't really know that much about them. This book fills that gap. It is the same course of Mughal history, but told through the lives of the queens. And you realize how powerful these women were in doing so many different things. They were the ones who were often the architects of the city. So while the men were out, politically, like strategizing and waging war and getting more territory, the women were the one who were often city planning. And cities like Delhi owe a lot to those Mughal queens and the plans that they had for that city at that time. They also owned a lot of the trade. When the East India Company men first came to India, to talk about trade, they were shocked that they had to go to the queens, because each queen kind of had her own trade domain. So and so control the silk route to China, and so control the spice route to the Middle East. And so you had to appease the queens and bring them gifts and kind of worm your way into their good books. It's a fascinating book. And then the other one I really love is called Indica, a natural history of India's geography. I think I'm butchering that subtitle, but it's called Indica by Pranay Lal. And it's an incredible compendium of all the really cool geographical structures of India. So you learn about why Bangalore has such good weather all the time because of this really interesting notch in the mountain range that's near it that allows cold air from the sea to come in. And that notch is actually where that part of India used to be connected to Madagascar. And then when we floated away, it created this little like a space in the mountains, and so Bangalore receives like this lovely breeze and weather because of that little space. And then he also talks about how, when you think of Jurassic Park, you only think of the US, but way, way, way earlier, we used to have our own version of Jurassic Park in India, and there's actual like skeletons and proof and everything of Indian dinosaurs. The biggest of whom was called the Rajasaurus, which I just love. So again, just another fascinating book. It's that one is a bit of a denser, slower read, but it's got beautiful photos. So if you don't mind just reading it slowly and seeing all the photos, it's lovely.
Awesome. So, and if anyone wants to find you on the internet, find your work or find your posts, what's the best way to um, find your work on the internet? So for someone listening in now.
Yeah, our website, unibrowstories.com, or Instagram, we have a lot of really fun reels and things scheduled for that. There we are Suki, SUKI underscore Unibrow.
Perfect. So, on that note, we come to an end of this episode of Learning Stories. Again, one of the reasons I started this podcast was to create a kinder and more empathetic version of the internet where we hold space for each other and where we realize that every career, takes years of effort, love, longing, sacrifice, and effort. And through these conversations, I'm realizing that every profession and career has something beautiful to it, and if we hold that space to understand why someone loves what they do, we learn a lot about ourselves and also the world in the process. So, Sukriti, thank you for sharing your story. This was really enjoyable, and I'm glad we got to do this. I do hope, at some point you consider writing a creative nonfiction book about Indian fabrics, because I think you'd do a fab job with something like that. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank
And
you so much,
until
Abhishek. This is lovely. What a great initiative.
thank you, Sukriti. And until next time, keep learning.